This is Dan Dix here, reporting for Press for Truth, and we are here with the one and only Josh Sigurdson of World Alternative Media. And now, Josh, I wanted to talk to you today about Venezuela, in particular because you've been covering this for years, probably since the turmoil began in terms of what we're seeing today. So I want to get into Maduro. I want to talk about the cryptocurrencies that they've been launching, but maybe before we get into those things, for anybody who's not really kind of new to this, maybe you can walk us through chronologically a little bit about what's going on with Venezuela today and how did they get there? What is this all stemming from, and how do we get to where we are today?
Well, see, one of the major issues we have today in the media, and independent media as well, is that it's almost this cut and dry thing where it's this is what caused this to happen and this is what needs to happen. And unfortunately, that's just cutting it too simple. There's multiple factors that play into this, and both sides are kind of right and both sides are kind of wrong. As far as it goes with the government inside of Venezuela, yeah, heavy regulations for years, heavy centralization, printing currency out of thin air, getting massive loans from the IMF that they couldn't pay back and they knew they couldn't pay back, causing mass amounts of debt, and of course a tyrant for a leader. If you can go back to Chavez, he was pushing these socialist policies forward, and it was really bad back then. But I mean, once Maduro got in, there was no return. It got so incredibly terrible all the same, while the United States government was also involved in trying to create a coup within the country, was attempting to destabilize a country, and was attempting to get their resources. So there's two factors that play into it. One, people say it was all the U.S. government. No, it wasn't. It was a combination of a dictator and an empire face to face, while the people eat out of gutters, while the people suffer, while the people become poorer and become more and more impoverished, and end up in the end breaking into zoos to steal the animals in order to eat them because the currency is so incredibly hyperinflated. So that is a major issue that we need to understand here, is it's not cut and dry. It's not as easy as just saying the United States government is doing all these terrible things and Maduro is doing all these terrible things. It's both of them combined, and it's all just a great example of how government gets bigger and bigger. Government continues to crack down on people's individual liberties because government benefits from subservience, government benefits from poverty, government benefits from people being on their knees begging for help, but completely dependent on that system. So I think one of the major factors that play into this most of all is centralization, government. So once again, banks and government, it always seems to come back to that.
And is there any similarities between the coup of the days of Chavez, back when it was, the revolution won't be televised anymore and this sorts of things? Are we seeing similar kind of tactics today?
There's always that kind of tactic because the U.S. government always wants to get involved in other countries, always wants to overthrow their governments if they're not favorable to their own. And obviously they've lost their favor in Venezuela, and they have for a long time, and they have an insanely rich country. It's amazing how many resources they have there, and one of the main ones being oil, of course. And of course they've had this massive debt with Russia. They've had a lot of tariffs and a lot of sanctions on them from different countries around the world that have stifled their oil exporting and their oil the money that's coming into their country. And it's weird because Venezuela is one of the most beautiful countries in the world. It's such an incredible place if it weren't for these tyrants running amok there. So I think there's a lot of combinations of the old coup versus a new coup, and I think they realize the country's insanely weakened. Maduro was arming his loyalists against his opposition to take out his opposition. So obviously a tyrant. All the while we have CNN saying, oh well, Trump is trying to destroy the country, destroy Maduro and everything, and Maduro is such a nice guy, while Fox News is like, Maduro is such a terrible guy, we need Trump to go in there. And it's just this mixture of two governments clashing. And once again, this is an example of, in the age of information, we have no excuse to be in the shadows about this. The news isn't properly covering the subject as per usual, which is why it comes down to us trying to explain what's really happening there, and the many solutions that are also, they're attempting to stifle as many of the solutions as possible right now in the mainstream media, and I'm seeing a lot of that lately. Just this attempt, almost like a limited hangout kind of psyop, where it's like, again, like I mentioned, it's this side or that side, when there is a center there where the individuals are trying to decide their fate and they're not being allowed to, and we'll go into that in a moment.
Well, let's talk about the solutions. We're losing the sun a little bit, so I'm just going to back it up so we can get back into it. But what a lot of people are doing solution-wise is look into things like cryptocurrencies, and specifically Bitcoin is one of the things that people in Venezuela turn to. And then we see the Venezuelan government go ahead and launch their own cryptocurrency. Can you tell us a little bit about what's going on with that?
Yeah, well, the main issue with that is that Petrocoin doesn't actually exist. It's not even a thing. It's fake. It's not a real thing. And people will go, oh yeah, because it's digital. No, not because it's digital. Bitcoin and Dash and these other cryptocurrencies are backed up with a blockchain that has some, has mining, has the ability to create it and actually use it or utilize it in transactions, and it goes back to a blockchain. Petrocoin, they have never actually proven that it actually exists. It doesn't exist. It's not a real thing. It's just a government trying to capitalize on a revolution or an evolution, really, and take it over, which is interesting because a lot of Petrocoin has been based on the idea of Dash, the cryptocurrency, and they've stolen a lot of the ideas from Dash. And what I find interesting about that is that Dash has been one of the most prominent cryptocurrencies in Venezuela by far, and one of the reasons for that being because the bolivar is so incredibly hyperinflated, and it's at a point where I'm not even calculating how much it's worth anymore because it's so ridiculous. People started naturally going to the streets to, trade and barter and utilize cryptocurrencies, mostly Dash, where you see these transactions taking place in stores all throughout Venezuela where people are actually utilizing this, and the government's like, you can't do this, or the government's saying, you must do this, and people are going, I don't really care what the government says anymore. They've screwed us so much. We are in so much pain because of them that we're just going to ignore them. And that was one of the great things about the solutions in Venezuela, is that people were just going, this is so stupid, I'm not even going to listen to these guys anymore. I'm going to do my own thing, and I'm going to trade myself, and because it comes down to life or death. They need to provide food for their family. And by listening to what the government is telling them, obviously they're becoming more and more impoverished. They're eating their pets. They had a rabbit plan in Venezuela where Maduro gave people free rabbits and then was surprised when people started putting bow ties on them and keeping them as pets instead of eating them. I mean, that's how crazy it got, to the point where Maduro's eating a burrito on television while people are eating their rabbits. And people are like, yeah, you know what? I'm not going to become subservient anymore. I'm not going to be subservient on this system anymore. I'm going to work for myself. I'm going to be an independent individual responsible for my own fate. I'm going to utilize Dash. I'm going to utilize cryptocurrencies. I'm going to watch that value gain or lose. But I mean, like Bitcoin and Dash going down, nothing equivalent to the Bolivar going down. So they've saved a ton of their purchasing power in those currencies. And then, of course, all while this is happening, this revolution or evolution, as you might want to call it, where people are kind of thinking for themselves and creating their own solutions, the government comes in, Petrocoin, you got to buy this Petrocoin and base it on oil. So now we can buy oil with something that's based on oil, because that makes sense. And at the same time, they have these governments, the United States government and these other governments, including Trudeau's government, who has said that he will ally with the U.S. government in taking down the Maduro regime, and then replace it with this IMF guy, Guaido, who, by the way, went to school under one of the top guys ever at the IMF, was taught everything he knows, and then the first thing he does when he is declared the legitimate president is ask for an IMF loan, which is one of the things that led to this problem in the first place. So just look, it's a clash of governments trying to regain the ability to control the populace, where the populace is like, you know what? We will just use cryptocurrencies. And they're like, oh, well, wait a second here. Let's send warships over. Let's cause blockades. Let's blow up things. Let's cause all these problems and make it as unbelievably terrible as it can be for the populace, because maybe, just maybe, they'll give up all these great, amazing free solutions and bow down to the state again.
Well, it could still go either way for them. It could backfire, and the people could certainly have a revolution there. So where do you see this going? I mean, is it only going to continue to get worse? Obviously, we don't have a crystal ball. We can't exactly tell where this is leading exactly, yeah. But we can have an idea on where this is heading in the next coming months and years. What are your thoughts?
It's hard to say, because I was so optimistic for so long when it came to Venezuela, because I actually saw it as a great example of potentially the age of information playing into a massive monetary crisis and governmental collapse, and maybe utilizing the blockchain to replace. It's not just currency, but I mean infrastructure on the blockchain that could replace all these things within the government that have been torturing these people, pushing them into poverty, making their lives miserable. I thought maybe we can finally see this really play out and the solutions come to fruition. And then the government got so involved in recent days, the U.S. government, the Canadian government, on top of that, this Guaido guy, and people praising a new leader as if replacing the puppet at the top of the food chain of the mob is going to change the mob. It's still like, oh yeah, the organized crime boss is different, but the criminal activity is still the same. So it's sad to watch. It's sad to watch because we see in places like Zimbabwe, where they had a hyperinflation 10 years ago, they just recently overthrew Mugabe, their leader, with a military coup, brought in this guy named Mnangagwa. Mnangagwa raised fuel prices like crazy, took off from the country, riots broke out, countless people dead. The currency is now the second highest inflated currency in the world again. And it's like, why do people keep thinking that government is going to solve government? Cancer doesn't cure cancer. I mean, kerosene doesn't put out fire. So I think that one of the main things that we need to look at is potentially just pushing for the information war on this end, trying to explain to people that, look, they're using you, they're abusing you, they're trying to utilize your subservience or your fear in order to control you more so. When you have these great alternatives that you are watching work, these cryptocurrencies are working for them. The blockchain infrastructure is working for them, and just as it starts to work to an extent where we could see a true evolution or revolution using the blockchain, the governments of the world come in, the media comes in, propaganda is pushed. You see the whole Iraq war nonsense stuff coming back up again and again. So I think going forward, I'm mostly optimistic. I think it'll work out, but because I think most people in Venezuela are sick of the government, but at the same time, I can't help but notice that, or respect the fact that this propaganda war is always very, very successful on the part of the military-industrial complex and the media. So it's like, will people be dumb enough to fall into it again, or are people going to be strong enough to break free from it? And that's a major question here.
Yeah, well, I agree 100%, and we are at that crucial time, that crucial fork in the road. It can go a number of ways, so it's going to be interesting to continue to see how this one plays out. But like you said, I think the cryptocurrencies is potentially a good way for them to go. Yeah, so why don't you let people know where they can go to find more from you? If they're not subscribed yet already, they should be. So let them know the channel if they haven't subscribed yet. World
Alternative Media. You'll find videos on Venezuela on that channel, going back to the beginning of the channel. I've been talking about this since about 2007, and warning, and everyone said, you're crazy, and now people are saying, I'm crazy again. And you know what? I really don't care. This is a real issue that's affecting millions of lives, and I'm going to stay consistent on it in the message of freedom and individual liberty and responsibility and self-determination. So go to World Alternative Media on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Steam it, and of course, find us on all the alternatives. Basically, anywhere you go these days, you'll find us, because it's the crackdown of the censors is getting worse than ever. So we gotta back ourselves up on as many platforms as possible. Yeah, diversify your portfolio when it comes to video sharing platforms and social media in general. Check the links in the description, located below. Thanks again, Josh. Yeah, thank you. We all want truth. The truth will set you free.